Hello and welcome to my channel, the Jellyfish Journals. I am Susie and I am about to update my reading journal for April 2025. You can see I've got my markers all ready to go with the colors on this card, and I just need to add a book that I just loaned out today to my friend Amanda. She actually finished reading The Maid, and now I'm loaning her The Mystery Guest, the second book in the series. She is going to return the first one. She just forgot to bring it on our walk this morning, so that will be checked off soon. I was able to get through 2 more books on my 25 and 25 list. I read The Maid's Secret, the newest release from Nita Prose. It was excellent, a very cute mystery book. My friend Amanda, that I just mentioned, isn't really a fan of thrillers or mysteries and things like that, but she loved the first book, so happy to cross that one off. The second book I read off my 25 and 25 list is The Parrot's Perch, which was a memoir, and it was also really good. I gave this one 5 stars. It's been a little while since I've read a 5-star memoir, but I really did enjoy this one, and it is definitely a keeper. I decided to go ahead and layer this blue a few times to darken it a little bit, and then the stripes on the book are just 1 layer, so they're a little bit lighter than the rest of the book. On to my reading log, and I was able to get through 14 books in the month of April. I got through a few more audiobooks than normal, but also made it through, oops, that's my pizza. I'll be back in a minute. All right, I totally forgot that I put pizza in the oven before I started doing my voiceover, so sorry about that. As I was saying, I got through a few more audiobooks than normal. Digital books than normal, and part of the reason is I did read 1 short story on my Kindle. It seems that Amazon Prime, when you get your free Prime read, it seems that every month they're also adding a bonus short story for free. And I happened to look at my Kindle library and noticed I was accumulating a lot of these bonus short reads. So I'm thinking I might try to get through 1 or 2 of them a month just to kind of help keep clearing them out. I do struggle with whether they count as a read or not, but part of me feels like if the author took the time to write it, and then it should be read. It should be counted as a book read. So the book I read was, I think it was The Sublet, and I'm blanking on who it was by. I'm hoping I'm about to write it in a minute. I feel like maybe I think it was Greer Hendricks. And it was really good. It was actually a really good little short story, a little shorter than some of the other short stories I've been reading lately, actually. So not too bad. But the other reason I was able to hit 14 books is one of my students insisted that I read a book that he loved called Impossible Creatures. And he was so adamant about it that I stopped my list, I read his book, and then immediately started panicking that I wasn't going to make it through my list that I was hoping to get through in April. So I did take a little time to kind of power through, but I think between that extra read from my student and that short story, it kind of bumped up my number this month a little bit. On to my reading challenge book. This book was called Bitter Orange. Pardon me. And I just had to read a book with a plant on the cover. All right, on to my book bracket. The best book I read in April was Kill for Me, Kill for You. And you'll notice I have not picked a winner for January, February, March, or April, like between those months. I haven't quite decided. I think maybe after June I might go back, but I might also try to do it at the end of the year. I haven't quite decided how I want to move along on my bracket yet. As I said, I did read 14 books in the month of April, so I'm just filling that in on this graph here. And again, decided to go with that blue. I guess I was feeling very blue because I feel like I leaned towards blue for a lot of my larger spaces in the month of April on all my spreads. I read, I think it was something like 4,374 pages. So just kind of marking that. You'll notice I flipped over my ruler there. That's so that that edge is not flush with the page anymore, which means it's not going to smear when I lift it up. And that's a trick I learned from Mark Your Pages on YouTube. Moving along to my dates finished. This one always requires a little bit more thought because sometimes I finish more than one book on a day. So sometimes I might finish an audiobook and a print book on the same day, or a digital and a print. I think there was one day I almost finished all 3 formats in one day. And I don't remember what happened. I think I actually made a conscious decision not to do that to myself because of this spread, which might sound silly, but it also is not like a goal of mine to finish 3 formats in one day. And so if I bumped one of them to the next day, that's not that big a deal to me. This is mostly just for my enjoyment, just to see if there are any, I'm trying to think of the word, if there are any, not habits, but like things that continually happen over patterns, that's the word I'm looking for, just to see if there's any patterns. You can see in March, the column just to the left of this, I finished a book 5 days in a row. That was spring break, and so I was able to get a lot of reading in during that week. I did have a couple of days where I finished both a print and an audiobook. I do get through print and audiobooks more than any other format. Well, I guess the only other format would be digital. I typically fall asleep while I'm reading my digital book because that usually means the lights are out, my husband's already asleep, and so I just read until I pass out. But there you go. I counted my books there just to make sure I did get them all, and now it's on to the year published. So this month I ended up reading 10 books that were published between 2020 and 2025, and so that color is pink. So you're going to see me coloring 10 different flowers in this garden, all with that pink color. I really don't have any good tips for this other than just really focus, keep track, and don't forget how many you've already colored. So it's funny, when I do this, I usually pause whatever I'm watching and I just keep saying the last number in my head over and over. So I think this might be like number 4 or 5. And then I'm like 6, 6, 6, 6, because it helps me not lose track of where I'm at. I am trying to spread out that pink as much as possible so there aren't any like just big pink blobs of plants somewhere on this spread. Again, when I made this, I had envisioned that it would be full of all the different colors, and I think I really just didn't realize how many books would fall between 2020 and 2025. I mean, a 5-year span, but yeah, once I go look at the year it was published, it turns out a lot of the reads are a little bit newer than I was thinking they were. Some books, I guess, feel like they've been out for a long time, and maybe 5 years is a long time in the book world, but it sure doesn't feel like it was that long ago. So just kind of using this green anywhere I saw a lot of that pink. I'm just kind of trying to use this green to break up some of that pink. 4 of my books were between 2010 and 2019. All right, so now I am on my book shelfie page, and this is just where I keep track of the physical books that I've read that I own on my personal TBR shelves in my house. I'm trying to be very clear about that because you're going to see that I color fewer than 14 books. Most of the books that I read each month are a combination of audio and digital for the most part. These are books that I currently own on my shelf, and I try to get through 5 or 6 of them every month. So the ones that you're seeing on this shelf right now are the ones that I have owned the longest, meaning they have been waiting the longest to be held and read by me, or I guess by anybody really. But they are on my shelf, and I just try to get through some of the books that have been there the longest. That way there isn't a book sitting there that I have just never gotten to. So I just go through here and color the ones that I read using those same colors on my chart. And now we're looking at my genres read and where I acquired my new books from in the month of April. So I do keep a little tally in a book off to the side just so that I can keep track. The chart on the left for genres read, each box represents 2 books. So you'll notice I half fill in some of these. I read a lot of thrillers, and I knew I didn't have room for 1 book at a time. So I tried to be very deliberate about making each box worth 2. You're also going to see that under fantasy, I had to add dystopian, and you're about to see that under thriller, I'm also going to add the word horror. I really don't read a lot of horrors. I did read How to Sell a Haunted House this month, and from what I can tell, it is classified as a horror. I thought it was actually pretty funny. So now I'm moving on to where I acquired new books in the month of April. This month, most of my books, I believe, came from little free libraries. My school has, one of the teachers set up a little free library in our teacher's lounge. And I would love to know who it is, but somebody was dropping off some pretty good books in that box. So I definitely acquired a few more this month than I probably would have if that had not existed. On to my year in review. So this is just my spread where all of the data for the month is in one place, or I should say all the months. So this is just where I log that same information, and really a lot of these pages are just saying the same thing over and over in different ways, and I realize that, but that doesn't change how fun it is. And on this one, it's just nice to see all of these stats in one place. Now, at some point in here, I realized that I did not get through 4 digital books. That's what I wrote down on my paper, but I went back and I'm double checking all of the things that I wrote down. And I think what happened is one of my capital P's ended up looking like a D. And I assumed that I read 5 print and 4 digital. But as I said before, I never get through that many digital books in a month. I really only made it through 3 because of the short story that I read that I mentioned earlier. So I tried to turn that 5 into a 6. It still looks a little wonky to me. So I just found a little scrap of dot grid paper and I just glued that over the top of my mistake. And now I'm ready to go ahead and write my 6 because it was actually 6 printed books that I read and only 3 digitals. But you're going to see me pause a few times because I am just triple checking. I think at some point in here too, my husband came down to say hello, and so I stopped to chat for a quick minute, but he's pretty great about being supportive of this hobby and quickly left the basement so that I could get back to it. So 6 print, 3 digital, and 5 audiobooks. And I acquired 13 new books. So if you remember what I said earlier, yes, I read through 14 of them, but as you can see, 8 of those books were not physically on my shelf. So I did acquire 7 more books than I actually read this month. It was the first month that I had a do not finish book, a DNF, and I just made a little note on the side that Impossible Creatures was an insisted read from one of my students. The only A to Z book this month was Kill for Me, Kill for You, so it got glued on letter K. And now I am going to fill in all of my Read the Worlds. I covered a few states this month. I believe I had Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Tennessee, and South Carolina in the United States. And I try to make little X's in there just so that I don't forget where they are, because something about I write them down, but then when I go to fill in the maps, I start to get a little overwhelmed looking at all the spaces, and I get nervous that I am filling in a space that I did not mean to fill in. And you'll see that I am filling in Brazil right now, which is ridiculously large. Obviously, you know how large Brazil is, but I think when you go to color in these spaces, they just feel a bit larger. The book I read that took place in Brazil was my memoir for the month. That was The Parrot's Perch. And it was about, I guess police brutality in Brazil would be the best way to say it. Definitely highly recommend reading that. I did read a book that took place in Japan, and I also read one that took place in France. And so that was kind of fun to start filling in things in other parts of the world. And now I am moving on to my book bingo page. And this month I read a book that had a teacher as one of the characters. That was The Perfect Stranger. I also read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which was a book that took place in a coffee shop. And I read, that was it for book bingo, but I realized I never wrote down the only one left for a book that takes place in a mansion. So I did add that in, and you can see, yes, I have a bingo. I honestly don't even care about that. I really just wanted something else that I could track and have some fun coloring in. So hopefully by the end of the year, I'll fill in the whole thing. On to my Read the Rainbow. I am obviously going to use The Maid's Secret for yellow. It is probably the yellowest book I will be reading probably ever in my life. And I don't know why I was having some trouble sticking these down. There was nothing wrong with the glue. I just kept putting them down and in a weird way, and they'd get like a lump in them, and it was bothering me. I chose One by One by Ruth Ware as my light blue cover. That may change as the year goes on, but for now it kind of worked out really well. On to my thriller tropes. I recommend muting or skipping this part if you don't want any spoilers, but I do have Kill for Me, Kill for You as a revenge trope, and One by One as a closed circle of suspects trope. All right, sadly, time for my first DNF of the year. I started listening to Mad Wife, and in short, was totally not for me. So my very first DNF of the year was glued down in there. I know I've debated what I was going to do with that space. I think the plan is just going to be to glue them in there. Hopefully there aren't too many of them this year, but I would be fine if there are more, if they kind of overlap each other in that little box space. The last thing I do every month when I'm updating my yearly stats is to list any new books that I acquired in the month. So I am writing down those 13 new books. I write down the author and I write down where it came from. And so you're going to see a lot of LFLs, which stands for Little Free Libraries. I don't really distinguish where the Little Free Library was. Sometimes, for example, if my husband and I are driving around and we happen to see one near the road or something, we just pull over. So I don't really keep track of that, or if it was the one in the teacher's lounge, that doesn't matter to me. I think what I like looking at is that it was completely free. And for anybody wondering, yes, I do. When I finish a book, if I decide I'm not going to keep it, I do put them back in Little Free Libraries. And a lot of times those are 4-star reads. They're books that I loved. I just know that I'm not likely to ever recommend or read them again. And so I passed them on because somebody else might like them. Um, yeah, I think that's mostly all I have to say about that. I am getting a little nervous. I put much fewer lines on my new book spread here because my original hope was that I wouldn't go crazy acquiring books. And then last month in March, I think I had 19 new books, and that was just completely circumstantial. Um, so, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and put my library card back in the pocket in the front. And now it's time to move on to updating April. So happy with this forest spread. I really think it might be my favorite so far this year. Um, so, yeah, I just love all these greens and browns and all these nature colors, these natural colors. I right now am coloring in the cover, or I should say, the spines of the 5 books that I really was hoping to get to in the month of April. Sorry, there's a big A looking at me, and I'm still about to say the wrong month. Like I said, I got a little bit nervous this month. I remember my student came in and was dead set that I read this book. He kept telling me how good it was and how it was his favorite and he got it for Christmas and I should read it. And I told him, okay, I'll look into it this summer. And he brought the book in the next day and clearly was hoping I would read it as soon as possible. So I really try to foster a love of reading in my students. My thought is that even if they are not readers right now, um, I like the idea of normalizing reading as a hobby, and I like the idea of it not meaning that you're nerdy or you're a loser or that you're a massive introvert. My students see me as fun and spunky and outgoing, and reading is just something I happen to love doing. Um, but anyway, I read that book, and it was, when he brought it in, it was pretty big. I want to say it's over 400 pages, maybe close to 500. And I remember looking at it thinking, oh, this is going to mess up my plan for for April. But thankfully, once I finished it, I realized I'd already read, I think, 3 of these by then. So I just had to kind of get through the other 2, and it all worked out in the end. I haven't figured out quite what I'm going to do if I don't finish one of my up next books for the month, but I know myself well enough to know that a blinding white spine that doesn't get to get colored would really drive me bananas. So I think if it meant I wouldn't sleep for 24 hours to finish a book so my journal looks good, I think I would probably do that. My reading challenge book was Bitter Orange. I talked about that a little bit. And funny enough, I did have an orange theme in February, but this book did not match the prompt for February. So it is in April because I had to read a book with a plant on the cover. Definitely an interesting read. 4 stars. I am probably going to drop it in a little free library soon, though. All right, time to list those 13 new books again, just so that if I next year in April, I want to look back and see what April looked like this year for me. I only have to look at this section of my reader's notebook. So I'm just sort of writing down, not sort of, I'm just sort of writing, I said it again. Oh my goodness, I must say sort of a lot. I'll have to ask my class. They pick up on things I say all the time. It's so funny. But I'm writing down, not sort of, I'm writing down the titles of the books that I acquired in April. There were 13 of them. I wasn't really sure how much space I needed for that, but you'll see that I ended up not even needing that whole last line here to get all 13 of those in. I thought about doing something on that line or writing something, but in the end, I guess it is a little satisfying that I didn't buy or acquire, I guess I should say, enough books to fill this whole list out, but 13 is still a bit much if you ask me. um, Moving on to my top reads for April, and one of them was Kill for Me, Kill for You. I had a lot of 5-star reads in April, and it was tricky to narrow it down to 3 of them. I eventually went with the three that I thought would stick around in my head the most or the longest, or the three that I would recommend more than any other ones. So, The Maid's Secret by Nita Prose, Kill for Me, Kill for You by I think it's Stephen Kavanaugh, and The Warbler by Sarah Beth Durst. They were all phenomenal. I really enjoyed them. And funny enough, one was print, one was audio, and one was digital. I would highly recommend any of these three pretty much to anybody. I think they were just all three phenomenal books. Moving on now to just the monthly stats. And this was my page where I wanted it to look like somebody had gone out into the forest and collected a bunch of trinkets or, little samples of leaves and things like that. Kind of like a nature lover's table in their workshop, if you will. So I just kind of had some bottles that I printed up off of Google, and they were empty bottles so that I could write whatever I wanted inside of them. And it's worked out really well to use those to put my stats in. I have to be honest, it's kind of like I don't ever want to DNF a book, but it was kind of fun to be able to write 1 this time instead of 0. It's kind of getting to be mid-May, and I think I did have a DNF for this month as well. So hopefully that's not a trend that's changing. I definitely think it's more satisfying to read good books that you want to finish. But I guess it's like a source of pride thing too, because for the longest time I would force myself to finish books. And then a good friend of mine, Alyssa, told me that life is too short to read books you're not enjoying. And so when I make the decision to not finish a book, I'm kind of proud of myself because I am prioritizing my time and books that I'm excited to go read instead of forcing myself to read something that is not bringing me any joy. The last spread is my books read, and so this is where I put all of the books, the covers of the books that I read in the month. And as I said, I read 14 of them. I think the last few months I've only read 12. So it was definitely kind of interesting to try to shuffle things around because I've noticed over the past few months I've had trouble either getting the information down underneath each book that I want to, or spreading things out in an aesthetically pleasing way. So it takes me a few minutes and I have to play around a little bit to kind of make it all work out, keeping that in mind. I do put the books in the order that I read them. I don't know if that really makes a difference, but sometimes it's kind of interesting just to see because I do try to mix it up. So, for example, if I read a thriller, I will try to maybe read a memoir or historical fiction after that. I do try to not read too many thrillers in a row. I also try not to overlap. So in other words, I always have a digital, print, and audiobook going at the same time, but I try to make sure they are not all the same genre because then I would get confused. So a good example, I'm trying to see where there might be a little crossover here. So I think a good example is I was reading Impossible Creatures in print, which was the book my student loaned me. Then I was listening to Grady Hendrix' How to Sell a Haunted House, which is technically horror thriller-ish. And my digital book was Deeper Than the Dead by Deborah Webb. And so because they had very different storylines and plot lines, it was not really that big a deal to stop listening to one or reading one and start reading another one. And I only mention that because I have had people in my personal life ask how I can read multiple books at a time. And I've actually known people who've read up to 8 or 9 books at the same time. I don't do that, but I do like to at least have one of each format going, just to, that way, depending on my mood, I can just pick something up and read or listen to it. So my last step every month is just to write down the format that I read the book in. So I put a D, not a D, yes, a D, a D, a P, or an A. So for digital, print, or audio. And then I just put the star rating underneath the book cover. And that's pretty much all that I do. As you can see, I did have a lot of 5-star reads this month. April was a good month for reading as far as quality of books, but that's about all. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye.